My wife's recently divorced friend had just finished teaching her the 5 red flags to watch for in husbands, and how disappearing for a few days would reveal my true nature. What she didn't know was that I have excellent hearing, and I'd heard every single word from the kitchen. I was getting a late-night snack when their voices drifted from the living room. At first, I thought it was just typical girl talk, but then I caught fragments that made me freeze with the fridge door halfway open. Trust me, men show their real colors when they think they're losing control, the friend was saying. Her divorce had been finalized just 2 months ago, and apparently, she'd appointed herself as some kind of relationship expert. You create a little distance, watch for these signs, then disappear for a few days. If he's got any of these red flags, he'll either turn desperate and pathetic, or he'll get angry and controlling. I quietly closed the fridge and moved closer to the doorway, staying just out of sight. But what if I'm wrong about him? My wife asked. There was uncertainty in her voice that I'd never heard before. Look, you've been married for 6 years. Don't you think it's time to really test if he's the man you think he is? The friend's voice had that tone people use when they think they're being wise. I wish someone had told me to look for these things before I wasted 8 years of my life. My wife was quiet for a moment. Then, what are the signs again? I listened as her friend laid out this elaborate psychological manipulation disguised as relationship advice. Red flag 1. If he gets defensive when questioned about basic things. Red flag 2. If he tries to control where she goes or who she talks to. Red flag 3. If he makes everything about himself when she expresses concerns. Red flag 4. If he can't handle her needing space. Red flag 5. If he tries to fix everything with money or gifts instead of addressing real issues. The disappearing test is foolproof, the friend continued. You create some conflict about these red flags, then tell him you need time to think. Go stay somewhere for a few days. A good man will respect your space and maybe do some self-reflection. A bad one will either become a stalker or throw a tantrum. I don't know, my wife said slowly. That seems manipulative. It's not manipulative, it's strategic. Look what happened to me when I didn't pay attention to the signs. Do you want to end up like me, starting over at 34? I'd heard enough. I slipped back to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich, processing what I just learned. My wife of 6 years was planning to test me like some kind of lab rat because her bitter friend couldn't handle her own failed marriage. The really interesting part, I actually didn't exhibit any of those red flags. I'd always encouraged her friendships, supported her career moves, and we built a pretty solid partnership over the years. But apparently, that wasn't enough proof for someone who'd been married to an actual problem. Over the next few days, I watched my wife like I was studying for an exam. She started picking strange fights about things that had never bothered her before. On Tuesday, she accused me of being dismissive when I said I trusted her judgment about redecorating the guest room. On Wednesday, she got upset that I hadn't asked enough questions about her day, claiming I didn't really care about her work. By Thursday, the pattern was clear. She was following her friend's script perfectly, trying to create scenarios where I might display these supposed red flags. The problem was, I knew exactly what she was doing. Friday evening, she delivered the big finale. I think I need some space, she announced while I was watching the game. Her timing was theatrical, like she'd rehearsed it. I've been thinking about us, about some things that concern me, and I need a few days to clear my head. I muted the TV and looked at her. Okay, where are you thinking of going? She blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. My mom's house. Maybe for the weekend, possibly longer. How much longer are we talking about? I don't know yet. That's why I need space to figure things out. I nodded calmly. When were you planning to leave? Tomorrow morning. She was watching my face carefully, probably looking for signs of panic or anger. All right, drive safe, and let me know if you need anything. She stared at me for a long moment. That's it. You're not going to ask what this is about. You said you need space to think. Asking a bunch of questions right now would kind of defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? I could see the confusion in her eyes. This wasn't going according to her friend's playbook. I just think we need to evaluate some things about our relationship, she said, trying a different angle. Like what things? Like whether we're really compatible long-term. Whether you're the kind of man I can build a future with. I kept my expression neutral, even though inside I was already 3 steps ahead of her little game. Well, I hope the time away gives you clarity. She packed a bag Saturday morning, kissing me goodbye like she was going to war instead of her childhood bedroom 20 minutes across town. I'll call you in a few days, she said. Sure thing. Take care of yourself. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I poured myself a cup of coffee and started making a list. If my wife wanted to test me, she was going to get results, just not the ones her friend had prepared her for. The beautiful irony was that I actually passed her ridiculous test with flying colors. I hadn't gotten defensive, controlling, self-centered, clingy, or tried to buy my way out of conflict. But I'd also heard the whole conversation that started this mess, and that changed everything. The week leading up to her departure had been like watching a bad actress rehearse for a play she didn't understand. My wife had transformed from the woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years into someone following a script written by her recently divorced friend. It started Monday morning when I made coffee for both of us, same as I had for the past 3 years. Instead of her usual thank you, she studied the cup like I'd handed her a suspicious package. You always make it exactly how you like it, she said, taking a careful sip. I looked at her over my own mug. You've never complained about the coffee before. I'm not complaining. I'm just noticing patterns. What patterns? How you assume everyone wants things the way you want them. This was rich, considering she'd complimented my coffee brewing skills just last week. But I could see where this was headed. Red flag number 3, making everything about myself when she expressed concerns. Would you prefer to make your own coffee? I asked. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She set down her mug with more force than necessary. See? You're getting defensive. Bingo. Red flag number 1. I took another sip of my coffee and shrugged. I'm asking for clarification. If that's defensive, then I guess I'm defensive. She stared at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. This wasn't going according to her friend's manual either. Tuesday brought a new performance. I came home from work to find her reorganizing the closet, pulling out clothes and making piles on the bed. I'm getting rid of stuff I never wear, she announced. Sounds good. Need any help? Actually, yes. She held up a dress I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. Do you remember why you got me this? It was a trap question if I'd ever heard one. Because you liked it when we saw it at the store? Because you thought I'd look good in it for you? Well, yeah. I wanted to get you something you'd feel beautiful wearing. But did you ask if it was something I actually wanted? I sat down on the edge of the bed, watching her hold that dress like evidence in a trial. You seemed excited about it at the time. I was being polite. For 2 years. You wouldn't understand. Red flag number 5 was apparently about fixing things with money and gifts. The fact that she'd worn that dress to 3 different events and received compliments each time seemed irrelevant to whatever point she was trying to make. Wednesday's episode involved her announcing she was going out with co-workers for happy hour. Sounds fun. What time should I expect you home? Her eyes narrowed. Why do you need to know? I don't need to know. I was asking so I'd know whether to save you dinner. I can take care of my own dinner. Okay. I shouldn't have to check in with you about my plans. I didn't ask you to check in. I asked when you'd be home so I'd know about dinner. That's the same thing. It really wasn't, but I could see red flag number 2 taking shape. Apparently, showing basic consideration for your spouse's schedule was now controlling behavior. Have a good time, I said, and went back to reading my book. She stood there for another moment, clearly expecting more reaction. When I didn't provide it, she grabbed her purse and left without saying goodbye. Thursday was the masterpiece. She came home from work already upset about something, but instead of telling me what was wrong, she started cleaning the kitchen with aggressive efficiency. Rough day? I asked. I don't want to talk about it. All right. I went to change out of my work clothes. When I came back, she was scrubbing the stovetop like it had personally offended her. You know what bothers me? She said without looking up. What's that? You didn't even try to find out what was wrong. I leaned against the counter. You said you didn't want to talk about it, but you could have tried harder. I could have ignored what you said and pushed you to talk when you clearly didn't want to. A caring husband would have tried. This was red flag number 3 again, but with a twist. I was somehow supposed to read her mind and know that I don't want to talk about it actually meant, please convince me to talk about it. What happened at work? I asked. Now it doesn't matter. The moment's passed. I'm asking now. Because you have to, not because you want to. I watched her attack a perfectly clean burner with steel wool and realized we'd moved beyond her friend's 5 red flags into some advanced level manipulation I wasn't equipped to decode. I'm going to grab a beer and sit on the porch, I said. Let me know if you want to talk. See? You're just walking away from the problem. What problem? You won't tell me what happened at work. You won't accept my questions about it. and you're mad that I'm not handling this correctly. I don't know what the correct response is. If you loved me, you'd figure it out. I opened my beer and looked at this woman I'd married 6 years ago. I do love you. That's why I'm not going to stand here and guess what you need me to say. That's when she delivered her Oscar-worthy performance about needing space. Looking back on it now, the whole week had been an audition. She was testing out her friend's theories, practicing the emotional manipulation techniques she'd learned, building up to the grand finale where she'd disappear and wait to see if I'd fail her psychological evaluation. The problem with her plan was that she'd married someone who actually paid attention. I'd noticed every forced argument, every manufactured crisis, every time she tried to bait me into displaying one of those red flags. But she'd also married someone who'd heard the entire conversation with her friend. So while she was packing her bag Friday night, carefully selecting clothes like she was going on a retreat instead of running a test on her husband, I was already planning my own experiment. She wanted to see what kind of man I really was when pushed to my limits. She was about to find out. Saturday afternoon, I stood in my driveway watching her taillights disappear around the corner. She'd driven away expecting to return in a few days to either a desperate, apologetic husband or an angry, controlling one. What she'd find instead would be something her friend's divorce playbook hadn't prepared her for. I went back inside and poured myself another cup of coffee. Then I got to work. First stop was my computer. I pulled up our joint bank account and took screenshots of everything. 6 years of shared finances, mortgage payments, utility bills, insurance premiums. I documented every shared asset, every joint responsibility, every piece of our intertwined financial life. Not because I was planning anything vindictive, but because I'd learned from watching her friend's messy divorce that preparation prevents problems. Next, I called my brother. He answered on the second ring. "What's up? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. In all the years you've known me, have you ever seen me be controlling or manipulative with anyone?" "What? Where's this coming from? Just answer the question." "Hell no. If anything, you're too laid back sometimes." "What?" She's testing me. Following advice from her divorced friend about red flags and husbands. My brother was quiet for a moment. "You're kidding. I heard the whole conversation. The plan is to disappear for a few days and see how I react." "And how are you planning to react?" "Like a man who doesn't play psychological games." "Good for you. You need help with anything?" "Actually, yeah. Can you swing by tomorrow with your truck? I might need to move some boxes." Sunday morning, I started in our bedroom. I pulled out every suitcase we owned and began packing her clothes with the same care I'd use for fragile antiques. I folded everything neatly, separated delicates from casual wear, even wrapped her jewelry in tissue paper. This wasn't about being cruel. This was about being thorough. Her books came next. 6 years of accumulated novels, self-help guides, and the collection of poetry she'd bought but never read. Each one went into boxes marked with her neat handwriting style. I even included the bookmarks. The bathroom took longer than expected. Face creams, makeup, hair products, the electric toothbrush she'd insisted on buying, vitamins, prescription medications. Everything that belonged to her went into boxes marked personal care and medications, handle with care. Kitchen items were trickier. We'd merged our belongings so completely that separating them required actual thought. The coffee maker she'd brought into the marriage went into her pile. The cast iron skillet I'd inherited from my grandmother stayed with me. Wedding gifts required judgment calls, but I erred on the side of generosity. My brother showed up around noon with his truck and 2 cups of Dunkin' coffee. "Damn, you're not messing around," he said, looking at the organized boxes filling the garage. "If she wants to test my character, she's going to get an honest result." "What are you planning to tell her?" "The truth. That I heard everything, I know exactly what she's doing, and I don't date people who play games." We spent the afternoon loading her belongings into neat stacks in the garage. Everything was labeled. Everything was accounted for. Everything was treated with respect. This wasn't revenge, it was clarity. Monday morning, I took a personal day and drove to Home Depot. The locksmith section had exactly what I needed. New deadbolt, new door handle, new garage door locks. I wasn't trying to keep her out forever. I was making a point about boundaries and respect. Installing new locks isn't rocket science, but it does require patience. I took my time, making sure everything lined up correctly, testing the mechanisms, checking the fit. When I was finished, I had 3 sets of keys to a home that no longer belonged to both of us. Tuesday, I sat down at my computer and wrote the note. Not an angry rant, not a bitter manifesto, just a clear statement of facts. I revised it 4 times, removing emotion, adding precision, making sure every word counted. The hardest part was the ending. How do you close a 6-year marriage with a signature? How do you summarize the dissolution of shared dreams, joint plans, accumulated intimacy? In the end, I kept it simple. Wednesday, I called a lawyer, not to start divorce proceedings yet, but to understand my options. What were my rights? What were my responsibilities? How do you legally separate from someone who's playing psychological games? Sounds like you're handling this maturely. The lawyer said after I explained the situation. Document everything. Stay calm. Don't do anything vindictive. If she wants to reconcile, you can consider it. If not, you'll be prepared. Thursday, I went through the house one more time, looking for anything I'd missed. A pair of earrings on her nightstand, reading glasses in the living room, a sweater hanging in the hall closet. Everything went into the final box marked miscellaneous items. Friday afternoon, I placed the note on the kitchen counter where she'd be sure to see it. Then I arranged her house keys next to it, along with the garage door opener and her copy of our home insurance policy. The garage looked like a well-organized storage unit. Boxes stacked neatly, each one labeled, everything accessible and accounted for. I'd even included a printed inventory list so she'd know exactly what was there. As I stood looking at 6 years of shared life packed into boxes, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not sadness, not anger, not even relief. Just clarity. This wasn't the ending I'd planned when I married her, but it was the ending her choices had created. She wanted to test what kind of man I was when pushed to my limits. She was about to discover that I was the kind of man who doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't accept disrespect, and doesn't play games. I was the kind of man who says what he means what he says, and follows through on his boundaries. Her test was almost over. Mine was just beginning. She returned on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 4 days after she'd left. I watched from the kitchen window as she pulled into the driveway with the confidence of someone who thought she held all the cards. Her phone had been buzzing with texts and missed calls from me, according to her friends' predictions. Except it hadn't, because I hadn't sent any. I heard her key hit the lock and stop. She tried it again, jiggling the handle. Then again, with more force. From my position at the kitchen table, I could hear her muttering through the door. What the hell? She walked around to the garage and tried that door too. More rattling, more confusion. Finally, she came to the front door and rang the doorbell like a visitor. I opened it and stood in the doorway, not moving aside to let her in. Hi, I said calmly. She looked me up and down, clearly trying to read my mood. Why don't my keys work? Because I changed the locks. You changed the locks? Why would you do that? Why don't you check the garage first? Then we can talk. She stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. This wasn't in her playbook. I was supposed to be either desperate for her return or furious about her leaving. Instead, I was standing here like I was discussing the weather. I don't understand what's happening here, she said. The garage door is unlocked. Take a look. I watched her walk to the garage with the hesitant steps of someone approaching a crime scene. She lifted the door and stood there frozen, staring at the neat rows of boxes that contained her entire life with me. What is this? She called out, but her voice had lost its confidence. That's your stuff. She came back to the front door, and now I could see the panic starting to set in. My stuff? What do you mean, my stuff? I mean everything that belongs to you. It's all there, organized and labeled. But why is it in boxes? Because you don't live here anymore. The color drained from her face. I was just taking some time to think. No, you were testing me. I know because I heard your entire conversation with your friend. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. You were listening to a private conversation? I was getting a late-night snack in my own kitchen when you two decided to plan out your little psychological experiment in my living room. It wasn't an experiment. I was just Dash. You were just following your friend's advice about the 5 red flags and how to test your husband by disappearing for a few days to see if he'd become desperate and pathetic or angry and controlling. She leaned against the doorframe like her legs had stopped working properly. I can explain. You don't need to explain. I heard the explanation already. Your recently divorced friend convinced you to test whether I was worthy of staying married to, and you thought that was reasonable relationship advice. That's not how it was. That's exactly how it was. Word for word. I took notes. She was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. So you packed up all my things because you were angry? I'm not angry. I'm clear. I don't date people who play psychological games. It wasn't a game. Really? Then what would you call creating fake conflicts about red flags that don't apply to me? Then disappearing to test my reaction. She had no answer for that. Did you find what you were looking for? I continued. Did I get defensive? Did I try to control where you went? Did I make it all about myself? Did I handle your need for space poorly? Did I try to buy my way out of the problem? No, but dash. So I passed your test. Yes. Good. Test results are on the kitchen counter, along with your keys and garage door opener. She pushed past me into the house and grabbed the note from the counter. I watched her face as she read it. Test results. I don't date people who play games. Your friend can help you find a new place. She looked up at me. This is it. This is how you end 6 years of marriage. I'm not ending anything. You ended it when you decided to test me instead of talking to me. But I love you. People who love each other don't run psychological experiments on each other. I was scared. My friend went through such a terrible divorce, and she was just trying to help me avoid the same thing. By creating the same thing, she set the note down with shaking hands. This is insane. You can't just pack up my life because you're upset about one conversation. I'm not upset. I'm done. There's a difference. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. With what foundation? You don't trust me enough to talk to me about your concerns, but you trust your bitter friend enough to follow her advice about testing me. What exactly would we rebuild? She started crying, but it felt performative after everything I'd witnessed over the past week. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Several choices, actually. You chose to listen to someone who's proven she doesn't know how to maintain a marriage. You chose to create fake problems in our relationship. You chose to test me instead of trusting me. And you chose to disappear for 4 days thinking I'd either become pathetic or controlling. I didn't think you'd leave me. I didn't leave you. You left me. I just made it permanent. She wiped her eyes and tried a different approach. What about everything we built together? The house, our plans, our future? What future? You spent a week trying to prove I wasn't good enough for you, then disappeared to see if I'd fail some test your friend designed. That's not building a future. That's sabotaging one. I can change. Into what? Someone who trusts their husband instead of testing him? Someone who talks through problems instead of manufacturing them? Someone who makes relationship decisions with their spouse instead of their divorced friend? She nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. Then you should do that. With someone else. The reality was finally hitting her. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a fight she could win by crying or apologizing or promising to change. This was a conclusion. Where am I supposed to go? Your friend can help you figure that out. She seems to have plenty of advice about relationships. She stood there in what used to be our kitchen, staring at her boxes of belongings visible through the garage door, holding keys that no longer worked, reading a note that ended everything she thought she knew about us. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. But you chose for this to happen. Every step of the way. And that was the truth she couldn't argue with. The phone calls started that night. 8 missed calls by the time I woke up Wednesday morning, each one more desperate than the last. I listened to the voicemails while making my coffee. Please call me back. We need to talk about this. I know you're angry, but we can work through this. I'm staying at my mom's, but this can't be how we end things. You're being unreasonable. 6 years of marriage can't just be over because of one mistake. I deleted them all and went to work. She showed up at my office around lunchtime. The receptionist called to say my wife was in the lobby asking to see me. Tell her I'm unavailable, I said. She says it's an emergency. It's not an emergency. It's a consequence. An hour later, she was standing in the parking lot next to my car when I left for a client meeting. She looked like she hadn't slept, which was probably true. You can't just ignore me forever, she said. I'm not ignoring you. I'm moving on. From 6 years of marriage? From someone who thought testing me was more important than trusting me. I said I was sorry. Sorry doesn't undo the choice. It just acknowledges you made one. She followed me as I walked toward my car. What do I have to do to fix this? Nothing. It's not fixable. Everything is fixable if both people want to fix it. I stopped and looked at her. Do you remember what you said to me Thursday night before you left? She looked confused. Which part? You said you needed to evaluate whether we were really compatible long-term. Whether I was the kind of man you could build a future with. I was upset. I didn't mean it like that. You meant it exactly like that. That's why you left. To test whether I was worthy of staying married to you. And you passed the test. Right? I passed. Which means the problem was never me. The problem was that you thought testing me was necessary. She started crying again, but I was immune to it now. Tears only work when they come from genuine emotion, not strategic manipulation. I can't believe you'd throw away everything we had over this. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm refusing to accept that psychological games are a normal part of marriage. Thursday brought a new approach. Her friend showed up at my door around 7 in the evening, looking like she was ready for battle. We need to talk, she said when I opened the door. No, we don't. She's devastated. She made a mistake, but you're taking this too far. Did you just say she made a mistake? Everyone makes mistakes in relationships. Testing your husband because your bitter friend convinced you he might be secretly terrible isn't a mistake. It's a betrayal. Her face flushed red. I'm not bitter. I'm experienced. You're divorced. Which means I know what red flags look like. It means you failed at marriage and now you're teaching other people how to fail at theirs. You don't know anything about my situation. I know you convinced a woman who'd been happily married for 6 years that she needed to test her husband like a lab rat. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment. She was having doubts. She wasn't having doubts until you planted them. The friend stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. You're going to regret this. Good women don't grow on trees. You're right. That's why I'm not settling for someone who plays games. She's not playing games. She's protecting herself. From what? A husband who supported her career, encouraged her friendships, shared household responsibilities, and never once displayed any of those red flags you taught her to look for. She had no answer for that. Here's some free relationship advice. I continued. When you destroy someone else's marriage with your toxic theories, it doesn't make your divorce feel less like a failure. It just makes you responsible for 2 failed relationships instead of 1. You're an asshole. I'm a man who doesn't accept disrespect from anyone, including my wife's friends who think psychological manipulation is good relationship advice. She left without another word. Friday brought the final performance. My wife showed up at the house with her mother, clearly hoping for backup support. She's my daughter, her mother said when I opened the door. I've watched her cry for 4 days straight. I'm sorry she's upset. Are you? Because you seem pretty calm for someone who just ended his marriage. I ended my participation in psychological games. The marriage was over the moment she decided to test me. Her mother looked genuinely confused. Test you how? I explained the whole situation while my wife stood there looking increasingly uncomfortable. The red flags, the manufactured conflicts, the disappearing act, the conversation I'd overheard. Is this true? Her mother asked. My wife nodded miserably. You tested your husband? My friend said dash. I don't care what your friend said. You've been married 6 years to a good man, and you tested him? It wasn't supposed to end like this. Her mother turned to me. What would it take for you to forgive this? Nothing. There's nothing to forgive. She made a choice based on what she thought was important. I made a choice based on what I think is important. Neither of us is wrong. We're just incompatible. She loves you. People who love each other don't test each other. They trust each other. Her mother looked at her daughter, then back at me. You really won't consider counseling? What would be the point? To teach her not to listen to her friends? To teach her to trust instead of test? To teach her that marriage requires communication instead of manipulation? Those are lessons she should have learned before she got married. They left together, her mother's arm around her shoulders. Both of them finally understanding that this wasn't anger or stubbornness or male pride. This was a man who knew his worth and refused to accept anything less than genuine respect and trust. The call stopped after that. The surprise visits ended. The intervention attempts ceased. She'd finally understood that her test had produced a definitive result. I don't date people who play games. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Clean, simple, no contest. She'd moved in with her mother temporarily, then found her own apartment across town. We divided assets fairly, settled debts responsibly, and signed papers that officially ended what her friend's advice had destroyed. I kept the house, not out of spite, but because I could afford the mortgage alone and she wanted a fresh start somewhere else. She took her half of our savings, her car, and all those neatly packed boxes from the garage. The ironic part? I never displayed a single one of those red flags her friend had warned her about. Not during the divorce proceedings, not during asset division, Not even when her lawyer tried to claim I'd been emotionally abusive by changing the locks. Your client tested my client. My lawyer had responded. He simply provided clear results. Her friend's marriage advice had backfired spectacularly. Instead of revealing hidden flaws in a good husband, it had revealed the fundamental flaw in their approach to relationships. You don't test someone you trust. You don't play games with someone you respect. I ran into her at the grocery store last week. She looked tired but seemed to be doing well enough. We nodded politely, the way former co-workers might acknowledge each other. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Good. You?" "Better. I'm seeing someone new." "That's great. He's nothing like you." I almost smiled. "Probably for the best." She hesitated, like she wanted to say more, then just nodded and walked away. I finished my shopping and drove home to a house that was mine again. No drama, no games, no tests, just peace. Her friend had been right about one thing. Good women don't grow on trees. But women who trust their partners, communicate their concerns honestly, and build relationships on respect rather than psychological manipulation, those are the ones worth waiting for. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who thinks love requires proof through testing. The test was over. I'd passed. But more importantly, I'd learned what I wouldn't accept in my next relationship. No games. No tests. No friends who think marriage is a psychological experiment. Just trust, respect, and the confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're worth.